This is House of History for the Armchair Historian. In my three-part series for the Armchair Historian website, I will cover Ukraine and the Balkans during the Second World War. Now, this is an incredibly difficult topic to tackle. The emphasis in this series will be on the German intelligence presence and missions in this area. If you'd like to see the other two parts, consider using the code in the description to sign up. I've managed to receive codes from my Patreon supporters that give a 100% discount. And of course, for my regular viewers, there are 75% discount codes in the description. There are many more exclusive history videos on the website, and it's definitely worth checking out if you're a history buff and you are interested in history that is not covered on YouTube. The Nightingale Commandos were a Ukrainian unit of volunteers that fought for the Germans during the Second World War. Now, most of Ukraine had been under Soviet yoke ever since the aftermath of the First World War and subsequent Ukraine-Soviet war. By 1926, more or less the entire country was under Soviet rule. During the 1930s, Stalin embarked on a collectivization campaign. It was mismanaged to the degree that most of Western territories under Soviet control suffered one of the worst famines in history. Suppressed by Soviet historians, the Holodomor, as it was called, was one of the deadliest episodes in Ukrainian history, with an estimated death toll of between 3 and 6 million civilians. The aversion towards the Soviets created through this debacle was one of those assets the Germans used at the outset of the Second World War. In western Ukraine, Galicia, the population was torn between bloody Soviet oppression from the east or milder Polish suppression in the west. So initially, the German troops advancing rapidly into Ukraine during Operation Barbarossa were welcomed as protector. Many Ukrainians were willing to become intelligence assets for the Abwehr, the German intelligence branch. Back in 1918, the Germans had put Ataman Skoropadsky in charge of the pro-German Ukrainian administration. When the Germans retreated upon their loss of the First World War, Skoropadsky was removed from power and he fled to Berlin, where he was financially supported until 1937. Another intelligence asset the Abwehr hoped would prove fruitful was the radical commander Yevhen Konovalets and his Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, or OUN. But in 1938, Konovalets was killed in Rotterdam by a bomb planted by the NKVD, the Soviet intelligence apparatus. He was succeeded by Andrei Melnik, but the right wing of the party rallied around Stepan Bandera. The OUN was split between moderates and radicals from then on. While these factions had their differences, both were on the payroll of the Abwehr. The Ukrainian insurgent army created by Bandera was set up in 1938. The camps they trained in were established by the Abwehr outside Berlin at an isolated holiday camp. After their training, they were then sent to an Abwehr camp and taught sabotage for missions in Poland and Ukraine. Now, not just the Germans funded these militants, but even the Japanese sent funds, as there was a large Ukrainian population in Manchuria. After all, their common foe was the Soviet Union. There were hiccups and tests of strength between Ukrainian partisans and Germans, especially when Hitler gave territory with the Ukrainian minority to the Hungarians, or when he ceased to fund the militant training schools in the wake of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Fortunately for them, the Abwehr could simply get the Japanese to take over their tasks, and Ukrainian partisans continued their training on German territory. As Operation Barbarossa was launched, these partisans often went behind enemy lines to sabotage bridges, communication lines, and liquidate Soviet partisans. In the autumn of 1940, the Germans were planning Operation Sea Lion in Western Europe, the invasion of the United Kingdom. Whilst this was transpiring, the German High Command also started plans to invade the Soviet Union in what would become known as Operation Barbarossa. In late 1940, a Ukrainian training camp was set up in Polish Silesia. The German High Command figured that it was there they would train their elite units that would assist them with invading the Soviet Union. Recruits that had been trained in Stepan Bandera's Ukrainian insurgent army now quartered there, and new units were formed. Under the command of Roman Shukovich, the militants were subject to extreme training in preparation of the liberation of their homeland. Other recruits came from Ukrainian troops that had deserted or surrendered to the Germans after they invaded Poland. It wasn't an autonomous body of Ukrainian militants within Nazi Germany, as you can probably imagine. It was overseen by the Germans. The German military commander in charge of the entire operation and training was Lieutenant Albrecht Herzner. The political officer of the unit was Professor Theodor Oberländer, a man that actively propagated ethnic cleansing of Slavic populations. The Abwehr named the unit after a famous Cossack choir. From now on, they were known as the Nightingale Commandos. When in June 1941 the German attack into the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, commenced, the Nightingales too flung into action. They, together with the Brandenburgers, the German elite special forces, now rapidly advanced into Soviet territory. Often behind enemy lines, during the night of the 29th of June, in a coordinated attack with Brandenburg units, the Nightingales received intelligence about a massacre inside the Lviv prison in Ukraine. The NKVD, Soviet Secret Service, was executing Ukrainian prisoners en masse before their retreat. The commandos advanced into Lviv, overtaking large parts of the city. That night, they overtook the radio station on the Vysoky Zamok hill. It was their first important objective they had captured. Now, just like the Lithuanians, the Ukrainians figured that in exchange for their support to Nazi Germany, they would be granted their own independent, sovereign state. Nothing was less true, however. As the radio station was captured, Yaroslav Stetsko broadcast the declaration of Ukrainian independence. The German High Command was quick to announce any such state existed. No. Western Ukraine, now that it had been captured, was to be incorporated into Hans Frank's general government of Poland. The Ukrainians that had enthusiastically welcomed the Germans as liberators from Soviet oppression quickly became disillusioned with their new occupiers. Within the Nightingale units, disaffection quickly spread and vocal opposition against the Germans became prevalent. As for Professor Oberländer, a sympathizer with the Ukrainian national cause, he was absolutely furious. He requested a personal meeting with Hitler right after the news became public and scolded him for betraying Nazi Germany's most useful ally in the war against the Soviet Union. Hitler's response is said to have been filled with obscenities and vulgar racism. Not too surprising there, to be honest. Oberländer was at a loss for words and returned to the Brandenburger headquarters, where he reported to the commander. An excerpt from their conversation reads, "That is, sir, Hitler's conception. And that is, sir, a conception that will lose us the war." Whilst initially the German response towards the declaration of an independent Ukrainian state was straight out refusal, but not violent, it didn't take long for the Germans to change their approach. Within several days, Yaroslav Stetsko and Stepan Bandera were transported to Berlin, where they were incarcerated in Spandau prison. Half a year later, they were transferred to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Here they would remain until 1944 and the war more or less certainly lost for the Germans. They were released in a last-ditch attempt to rouse the Ukrainians up against the Soviets, but to no avail. In the end, Oberländer wasn't too wrong about it being a tactical error to refuse the Ukrainians their national state. Hitler made a crucial mistake by identifying the Ukrainians with Stalin's communist rule. It is an odd point of view considering the extreme horrors and suffering the Ukrainian people lived under due to the Soviets. As the war progressed, regardless of Hitler's racism against the Ukrainian people, many Ukrainians still chose the German rather than the Soviet side. The crimes against humanity and famine perpetrated by the Soviets simply put too big a dent in the collective Ukrainian psyche. After the arrest of Stetsko and Bandera, surprisingly enough, around 200,000 Ukrainians still served in the ranks of the German army and SS. They will continue to do so throughout the entire war, fighting against the much-hated Red Army. As for the Nightingale unit, it was disbanded 1 month after the failed declaration of an independent Ukraine. The Germans closed it down, and parts of the battalion were transformed into both police and regular battalions, fighting for the Germans. Of the many incredibly complex stories of nations during the Second World War, Ukraine is definitely in the top bracket. This was House of History for the Armchair Historian. If you want to check out the other 2 videos about Bulgaria, Romania, and Yugoslavia during the Second World War, consider checking out the Armchair Historian website. There are many more exclusive history videos, and in the description are discount codes, both for regular viewers and a 100% discount code for all my patrons. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, a special thanks to all my patrons that support my work. If you enjoy House of History and want to support my work, consider visiting my Patreon. For just $1 a month, you will already gain access to the exclusive Patreon series. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.